Now, immediately after the flood, Noah and his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, began to raise cattle and till the soil. Cattle increased rapidly and vegetation was abundant. Many sons and daughters were born to Noah's three sons, and in time their descendants moved out into wider and wider areas. In the chapter of Genesis following the Noah story, the author gives a list of nations and a record of how the descendants of Noah spread over the world. By world, the author means the world that the Hebrews knew, the countries in a circle about the Mediterranean Sea and their own land of Mesopotamia. The descendants of Shem had received Noah's special blessing, and it was through Shem's descendants that God made a second attempt to win mankind to himself. Shem and his people formed a favored group, and later they became the chosen people, the Hebrews, the Israelites, the Jews. Noah prayed that Shem and his descendants would always acknowledge and worship the one true God, and that Japheth would enjoy earthly and spiritual blessings. In the development of nations and their dispersion into wider and wider areas, what these men might have learned about God was generally confused and blended with other beliefs and other religions, so that the inspired writer states sadly that among many of the descendants of Noah, they fell from God. The Tower of Babel. The story of Babel, or Babel, has to do with the descendants of Shem, who migrated eastward and discovered a valley in the land of Sennar and settled there. They said one to another, "Come, let us make bricks and bake them." They used bricks for stone and bitumen, a black tarry pitch for mortar. "Let us build ourselves a city and a tower so great it will have its top to the heavens. Yes, let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered all over the earth." The Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the men had built. And the Lord said, "Truly they are one people, and they all have the same language. This is the beginning of what they will do. Hereafter, they will not be restrained from anything which they are determined to do." So the Lord scattered them from that place over all the earth, and they stopped building the city. For this reason, it was called Babel or Babel, because there the Lord confused the speech of all the earth. From there, the Lord scattered them over all the earth. In this instance, the author of Genesis uses the story of the Tower of Babel to show that humans have learned nothing through the punishments of the past. From having to leave the Garden of Eden, right the way down to the awful, awful flood which killed all but Noah and his family, humanity learned nothing. He is still sinful, proud, and in opposition to God. The original story of the Tower of Babel was written to explain the beginnings of different languages in the world. A tower was being built, and a dispute, an argument arose between the builders and the workers. To punish them, so goes the story, the gods confused their languages so that they could not understand each other, and they dispersed into different parts of the world. Now, that was a mere story, an old legend told by ancient peoples. But our sacred author took this story and he used it for a very different purpose. He wasn't interested in explaining the origin of languages. No. In this chapter of Genesis, in fact, much earlier, in chapter 10 of Genesis, he had already spoken of languages and families and nations, which had settled the question of the use of different languages among humans already. No. The writer here, he sees something offensive, something bad, something evil in the hearts of God's people, of the descendants of Shem. And this is why he tells us this story. For Shem's descendants to have built a tower, as was customary in the ancient cities of Mesopotamia, well, there's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't matter how high they built it. What was wrong was their motive, what was inside their hearts. Their motive in building this great tower was wrong. It showed the evil in their hearts and the pride of their minds. The biblical writer describes God as speaking to show us that the minds and hearts of humanity were again turned against God. Let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top reaching into the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered all over the earth. This aim to reach a destiny according to their own planning without God's help, that is what the author is condemning. That is what the author is telling us about. A people living without the thought of God, without asking for God's help, thinking that everything would go to their own plans. It was the sin of Adam's pride all over again. It was the sin of man thinking he could do without God. Humanity without God is doomed to destruction. And we learn that from the story of the flood. And these were the sons of Shem, the chosen people, who had done this. God had made a covenant with Noah. They were not true to him, and Shem's descendants were rejected. If the world was to be saved, it must be in some new way. For in man as a whole, there could be no hope. The author tells us that as humanity grew older, it became less wise, less righteous, less holy before the Lord. Then something new happened. The promise of humanity's salvation would be carried on through God's choice of one